We've made it to the end of another week, folks. It's Friday, May 3rd, 2024. You're listening to the Mo.news podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to.
We put together a really fun quiz about the podcast. So if you listen to the podcast even casually, you probably will get most of them right. And so it's fun, funny. It's some inside jokes. So look for that over on Moshe. Is that going to be on the premium or the main feed?
Well, we've been giving a free preview of premium all week. So that will be on the main feed today. We're going to actually have two quizzes. We're going to have a regular news quiz and then our special edition podcast quiz as we promote the 1 year anniversary of Mo News Premium. Jill, I think we're at 700 or 800 signups in 24 hours here. So very exciting stuff.
All right, let's get to some headlines here. President Biden weighing in on the anti-Israel protests on college campuses, what he had to say, and why some Democrats think that maybe it came too late. Why Columbia's law review wants their finals canceled this year.
A lot of lawyers had something to say about this, Jill.
Former President Trump won't say for sure that he'll accept the results of the 2024 election. Just
like 2016 and 2020, it'll be an interesting November, December.
He also responds to claims that he keeps falling asleep in court. A status update on the U.S.-Mexico border. Another Boeing-related whistleblower suddenly dies, this one at age 45. It appears suspicious, although Moshe has been talking to some doctors.
Yeah, we'll bring you the medical explanation to combat some of the conspiracy theories.
An ex-Nickelodeon producer is suing the makers of Quiet on the Set for defamation. And now trending in nightlife, bingo raves.
B-I-N-G-O.
Things have changed a lot since we were partying, I guess.
Before your bedtime was 9 p.m., Jill.
A remarkable observation. Orangutans, turns out they're just like us. And it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend, what we are watching, reading, and eating.
Cheesecake babka, Jill. I'll tell you all about it.
All right, let's start with presidential politics and some concern on the Democratic side that the ongoing campus protests could hurt their party's chances in November. And with that, President Biden finally weighing in on Thursday after about 2 weeks of relative silence about the demonstrations across the country. Speaking on camera, he condemned the unrest disrupting campuses, saying that Americans, quote, have the right to protest, but not a right to cause chaos. Take a listen.
Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest. Threatening people, intimidating people, instilling fear in people is not peaceful protest. It's against the law. Dissent is essential to democracy, but dissent must never lead to disorder or to denying the rights of others so students can finish the semester and their college education.
At the same time, he also rejected calls from Republicans to bring in the National Guard on these campuses to break up the protests. Until now, the president had seemed kind of reluctant to speak out about the protests, frustrating a number of members of his party.
Jill, the White House appears to have been caught in a rough spot, trying to ensure they're not upsetting progressives and the left flank, who they believe they need in November. At the same time, the rest of the country, right? Everyone in the center, moderate, and on the right, who have different views of what's going on. So the White House has been trying to navigate these protests effectively by being silent, speaking in very kind of wide platitudes about things. They were asked earlier in the week about, on some of the campuses, they're bringing down the American flag and putting up the Palestinian flag over the campuses, and they wouldn't even condemn that, which led to a lot of folks commenting on that on social media. But it appears here there was enough pressure behind the scenes that pushed Biden to come out and speak on camera yesterday.
Speaking of the protests, on Thursday, police and authorities continued their efforts to dislodge or remove pro-Palestinian protesters from dozens of campuses across the country. On the West Coast, protesters calling for a ceasefire in Gaza occupied a library on Portland State University's campus. Police cleared the facility, arresting about a dozen people. Inside, though, they say they found caches of tools, what appears to be improvised weapons, ball bearings, paint balloons, spray bottles of ink, and DIY armor. Similar scenes playing out at UCLA, where police cleared out a large encampment. They arrested about 200 people. Classes are remote there again today. Protests also continue at Rutgers in New Jersey, at Fordham's Manhattan campus, the University of Texas in Dallas, Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, and Tulane in New Orleans. So, Moshe, it does not look like things are dying down anytime soon.
No, though some of the most high-profile ones are over now. You know, we've been talking about UCLA. That was a major raid overnight. WashU in St. Louis, both done now after police came in. Columbia University, the epicenter where it all started, now a completely calm campus after the raids earlier this week. At Brown University, Northwestern University, those encampments have become much smaller now after negotiation with administrators, where they actually made deals with the students in Northwestern and Brown agreeing to hold a vote later this fall about potentially divesting university funds from companies that work with Israel. As we've been focused all week on Columbia, we're getting some new details from there. The NYPD saying that they actually found 44 people inside that Hamilton Hall that had been occupied. The breakdown is as follows. Of the 44 people, 31 were students or university staff or people affiliated with the university. 13 people, about a third, were outsiders found in Hamilton Hall who had nothing to do with Columbia University, but happened to be occupying one of the buildings. One other note on Columbia, the law students associated with the Columbia Law Review, one of the more prestigious law schools in the country, have sent a letter to the law school saying they would like exams to be canceled or at a minimum made pass-fail, the law school pass-fail exams, because the law students who signed on to this said that the police raid this week of Hamilton Hall was traumatizing. The violence, they say, has left them shaken, unable to focus, unable to concentrate on studying for law exams. And so we wait the Columbia Law School's response here. Jill, a number of attorneys who follow us over on mo.news, didn't have much compassion for these law students, saying, do you guys know what it's like being a lawyer in the real world?
Or do you know what it's like being anything in the real world? I mean, you have to go to work, right? I mean,
sometimes you see
really
something on television or you see some videos on social media and you still have to, work and function. Anyway, sort of reinforces some of the stereotypes these days. We just thought we'd note that because got a lot of attention on the account. Jill, we're seeing the situation now unfold where you have the president coming out saying, enough is enough here. By the way, notably, Biden was also asked at the press conference whether these campus protests have changed his policy views or positions on anything. And his response was one word: no. Notably, on a few of these campuses, we've seen them take down the American flag and put up the Palestinian flag. That didn't go down well with many folks. In fact, some fraternity brothers, Pi Kappa Phi at UNC, were defending the American flag from being taken down again at UNC. Some folks online want to reward them with a party. And so they were donating to a GoFundMe account, a couple grand here, a couple grand there. Jill, the GoFundMe to throw the Pi Kappa Phi fraternity a party at UNC has now reached $500,000 on GoFundMe. The group of guys pictured trying to defend the American flag from being taken down. And I was talking to folks. I'm a GW alum, George Washington University in D.C. There's a big statue of George Washington in the middle of campus. That's now surrounded by the tent encampment. The statue now, they've graffitied genocide on it. They put a keffiyeh on George, and there's a whole bunch of bumper stickers with various protest slogans now on the George statue, which, talking to fellow alums, was pretty shocking to see. And with all that, you already see Republicans now trying to capitalize on this issue.
One of the more interesting takes on the protesters, I thought, was from Al Sharpton, who himself is kind of like a professional protester.
Yeah, Al Sharpton, very left-wing, very progressive.
And he came out and he just said, look, I have no problem with the protesters and what they're doing, but they have to understand that there are repercussions, and that's part of the gig. So if you don't want to go to jail and if you're not going to deal with the consequences, if you don't feel that strongly about it, then don't do it.
Right.
And he also had
Buck up, protesters.
And he also said that it felt like to him that the protesters were trying to become the story instead of letting Gaza, or whatever the reason is that they're protesting. He said it feels like they're kind of in it just to protest versus really being in it for the cause. It was kind of his read on the situation.
And you could argue that they've successfully made the story about themselves, not the story about what they say they're protesting about. And so you have some folks on the left, some people who feel passionately about Palestinian, freedoms, and are very anti-war here, saying these protests have been a disaster for their cause, that they haven't won anybody over. And at the same time, you already are seeing the politics of this play out. Jill, over in Washington, the Senate Republican campaign arm is out with new ads trying to tie Democrats to the chaotic scenes on campus. We should note that for the most part, besides some members of the squad and some of the more left-wing members like AOC, Jamal Bowman, Ilhan Omar, for the most part, most Democrats have been silent on this or have been critical of these protests, but there are enough Democrats who've been behind this that Republicans are trying to make this an issue the Democrats need to own. This is something they hope unites them, especially Speaker Johnson, who's facing some issues from his right. His House Republicans are launching investigations now into a number of the clashes on campus. They're talking about better oversight of federal funding for schools, all the various financial aid, all the various federal monies that go to schools. So Republicans are looking for accountability there. And then he pushed forward an Anti-Semitism Awareness Act on Capitol Hill. Just over 300 Republicans and Democrats voting for that. Though 21 Republicans and 70 Democrats voted against the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, the bill would mandate, if passed by the Senate, the bill would mandate that when the Department of Education enforces federal anti-discrimination laws, that it uses the definition of anti-Semitism that's been put forth by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. This is the larger definition of anti-Semitism that also includes that it's anti-Semitic to call for the destruction of Israel. Now, supporters of legislation, it was voted on pretty overwhelmingly, say it'll help combat anti-Semitism on campus. The opponents argued that it overreaches and threatens to chill free speech. And Jill, we talked about reaction in Washington. There's also reaction abroad. And this is fascinating. The New York Times has a report out today that Russia, China, and Iran have seized on these protests to try to stoke tensions inside the U.S. and have created a number of websites to reinforce the chaos happening inside the U.S. This is not a first, by the way. Back in 2016, we've talked about this on the Instagram account. Russian trolls actually recruited unwitting Black Lives Matter protesters to stage rallies ahead of the 2016 and 2020 elections. So people were literally, responding to these calls to hold protests, and they were being organized by, covert Russian cyber ops, trying to, create chaos, create tension around BLM, some of what we saw unfold in the aftermath of George Floyd there in 2020. This go around, there's no evidence yet that Russia, China, and Iran are actually producing rallies and protests yet, but according to NewsGuard, they've published hundreds of articles in English about the protests, a lot of it with misinformation, made up quotes, and they're creating inauthentic accounts on X, on Telegram, on other social media, trying to mimic Western news organizations. So they make up titles of news organizations that seem real to people who might not know the difference. And so they're trying to, stoke partisan tensions here, denigrate democracy, promote isolationism. Remember, you're talking about authoritarian governments, right? Russia, Iran, China. What do they want to do? They want to reinforce to their own people and around the world that democracy is a mess. You don't want democracy. Look what America is doing. It's tearing itself apart. And so that's a bit of the case they're making here. But they're also trying to reach a U.S. audience to get us to tear ourselves apart.
Well, and that's the argument about TikTok, really, in that China's basically going to put its thumb on the scale in promoting videos that, whether they care or not about what's going on in the Middle East, they do care about making people feel disgruntled about the United States and the U.S. role. And so some have argued that is why you see 50 times more pro-Palestinian videos on TikTok than you would see pro-Israeli. So it is fascinating to see the way that this is playing out. Yeah,
this is something, I want to caution everyone in the audience. People will send me articles being like, Moshe, why aren't you reporting this? And I was like, what is this publication? They're like, USAGazette.net. I go, that's a made up publication. I know it looks real to you, but this is likely put together by the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, or somebody just trying to mess with Americans. But it looks like a real story. It shows up in Google News sometimes. So always double check the website to see, like, does this look like a real thing? Have I heard of this publication before? Give the publication a quick Google before sharing something.
Also on the political front, former President Trump refusing to commit to accepting the results of the 2024 presidential election. In an interview with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, a real paper.
Oh, yeah. I was almost an intern, Jill, for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel in D.C. back in 2002.
He said, if everything's honest, I will gladly accept the results. If it is not, you've got to fight for the right of the country. He also insisted once again that he beat Joe Biden in Wisconsin in the 2020 election, which is not true. This week, Trump announced a joint effort with the Republican National Committee. They're calling it Protect the Vote. And he is describing this as an effort to ensure that what happened in 2020 will never happen again. So it is a little scary, actually, because you do see him already planting the seeds that if he is to lose in the election, that we could kind of see a repeat of what happened after 2020.
I mean, this is something he said in 2016. This is something he said in 2020. We can go back to presidential debates both years where he was asked by the moderator, will you accept the results? And he goes, we'll see. We'll see if it's fair. So this is sort of, regular Trump talking points. And I will, caution folks that 2020 was a situation where he happened to already be president, right? He had the powers of the Oval Office, military, national, he was president. This time around, he's the contender. So, at the same time, people are, worried about civil unrest, et cetera. I'm not here to poo-poo everything, but I will say, this is sort of standard Trump material right now in terms of, looking out of the election 6 months and asking him, will you accept it? And Jill, will end here with our political segment with the fact that the trial is still going on in Lower Manhattan. This is the criminal trial related to the Stormy Daniels hush money payments, Trump misclassifying how he reimbursed his attorney to pay off Stormy Daniels, not to talk about alleged affair that they had, though he denies that. That trial continues now 2 weeks in. We're heading to a third week next week. And Jill, the biggest headlines in the last day that I'm seeing from a bunch of publications, Trump apparently keeps falling asleep in court. And that prompted him to actually respond to all the headlines that he's falling asleep in court. He says on Truth Social, Jill, that he's simply closing his, quote, beautiful blue eyes to take it all in.
I don't even know anything to say.
I mean, I'll say this. He likes to call Joe Biden Sleepy Joe, and it's leading some folks to call him Sleepy Don, that he himself is falling asleep. I mean, Trump's big issue is that it's been too cold in the courtroom, and he keeps closing his eyes. But again, he says he just closes his beautiful blue eyes to take it all in.
All right, time now for the speed read from the Arizona Republic. Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs, a Democrat, signed legislation Thursday that repeals the state's 1864 abortion ban. That's one day after it passed the GOP-controlled state Senate. The law was first passed before Arizona even became a state, and it was never repealed, and it remained on the books for decades, effectively frozen while Roe v. Wade was the law of the land for about 50 years. And then the state realized it was still on the books when Roe v. Wade was repealed. In April, the state Supreme Court ruled 4-2 that the ban could actually be enforced. So while the governor has now repealed it, it could still technically be the law in the state for a few weeks over the summer.
Yeah, so the way the new law is written is that the repeal will not take effect until 90 days after the state legislature adjourns for the year. And the Arizona state legislature is still going right now. There's no end date in sight. So that means with this whole 90-day thing that at some point this law from 1864 will go into effect for potentially days, weeks, or a little over a month. Now, then the total ban goes away because of this repeal, and Arizona goes to a 15-week ban. But then in November, it's very likely Arizonans will have a chance to vote on a ballot initiative to make abortion legal again in the state. So just to recap, folks, right now there's a 15-week ban. They'll go to a total ban, then likely back to a 15-week ban. And then potentially legalize it again by November. It's an example here of just the chaotic state situation we're seeing in a bunch of states where the laws are getting repealed. They're discovering old laws. We saw something similar in Wisconsin where there's 2 laws in the books. So the state Supreme Court has to decide which law are we respecting, because in many cases, a lot of these states had laws on the books that when Roe v. Wade happens in the 70s, basically they never bothered to repeal because the Supreme Court overruled, basically is in charge of everything. And so the states suddenly in 2022 are like, wait, what laws do we have on the books from back in the 70s and before? And some of these states had laws from the 1860s, it appears. So Arizonans, watch closely, because over the next 6 months, you might have 3 different laws in effect.
From the Washington Post, Mexico sent about 600 troops to 2 of its states, which border Texas. The areas have seen an uptick in violence, including an attack on a Mexican army installation, the killing of a mayor who was seeking re-election, and several kidnappings. The region impacted was dominated by a drug cartel, but an international security expert says that breakaway groups have really taken control. He says the 2 states are among the primary routes for heroin and cocaine to make their way to the border and then into the United States. He says there is a reason why border cities and states remain hotly contested, and you have a lot of violence there.
Yeah, remember the incident a few months back we told you about, of the Americans driving over the border for one of those surgeries in Mexico and being kidnapped and some dying, because some of these states in Mexico, some are relatively secure and some are chaotic and beyond chaotic, with these drug cartels basically running the show and cops afraid of the drug cartels. What's notable here in Mexico, this is a shift for AMLO, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, the president there, who until recently had a hugs, not bullets policy when it comes to dealing with the cartels. He's avoided confrontations with them and instead tried to seek socioeconomic roots of organized crime, basically try to get at the root issue as to why these cartels are in charge. That has led to some backlash in Mexico, as well as criticism from the U.S. being like, please take charge of your side of the border, because of the chaos that then leads to this side of the border. His response is, well, you're the place, America, where all the guns are coming from across the border. So the drugs, the fentanyl, is coming from Mexico to the U.S. The guns are coming from the U.S. to Mexico. But there's been a lot of push. Blinken, the Secretary of State, was down in Mexico. Biden's been making some phone calls. And so Mexico has now helped the U.S., launching a campaign here to help bring down illegal crossings by putting the Mexican troops there, and it appears to have worked now. Illegal crossings, this is an interesting update, along the U.S.-Mexico border are down 40% since December. That's when it was at a record high. The levels have remained relatively stable through the first few months here of 2024. Typically, though, spring, right around now, is when it becomes very popular. It's warmer for more migrants to come across, and we have not seen an increase so far. The belief is that the Mexican troops here have been a major factor in helping the U.S. on that side of the border. They got military patrols, they got highway checkpoints, they're intercepting thousands of people every day. And so that means that we've seen this nearly 50% drop in migrants coming across the border in just a few months now.
The only other time in about 25 years that crossings declined during these springtime months was back in 2017, which was right after Trump took office, promising to deport millions of people. U.S. border officials say the next several weeks are going to be a key test. May has often been a peak month for crossings. The math seems to show, though, that the number of migrants stopped by Mexican authorities in recent months far exceeds the number Mexico has deported. So there could be hundreds of thousands that are biding time until the crackdown fades.
Remember, Mexico is a huge country, so these people could have gone back inside Mexico and are waiting to make another attempt. We'll see if the Mexican troops are stationed there on the border and continue to remain as vigilant as they have been in recent weeks.
From Business Insider, a second Boeing-related whistleblower died unexpectedly this week as the company faces scrutiny over safety failures. Joshua Dean was a quality inspector for Spirit Aerosystems, a supplier of Boeing jets. He raised concerns about improperly drilled holes in the fuselage of 737 MAX jets. His family shared that he died on Tuesday after a sudden antibiotic-resistant staph infection, commonly known as MRSA. He was 45 years old. Dean was one of the first workers to flag potentially dangerous defects with the 737 MAX jets at Spirit Aerosystems. That's the same jet where part of the body blew off mid-flight this past January.
Yeah, that Alaska Airlines jet that miraculously no one was injured on or was sucked out. So obviously when you hear Boeing-related whistleblower, many of you will remember that back in March, there was a Boeing whistleblower, John Barnett, who was 62. He died from what authorities said was a self-inflicted gunshot wound in his car as he was testifying about issues at Boeing. He was in the middle of his deposition. We should note both Barnett and Dean, the most recent individual who died, are rep by the same law firm. And so, as the kids say these days, Jill, pretty sus to have two of these individuals die here. But I put this question to our Instagram feed because I know there's a lot of doctors and nurses who follow us. I'm like, listen, this guy, ordinarily a very healthy 45-year-old guy who apparently works out all the time and has never been to the hospital, dies of these conditions. Is this normal? So we polled a number of doctors and nurses who follow mo.news. And while they did say that the sudden onset of all of this is pretty rare, many of them have seen this before, where basically you get the flu, it then goes into pneumonia, it then goes into MRSA, that leads to kidney failure, which then leads to strokes, which then leads you to have to take drugs that leads to a loss of blood flow to extremities, because they're talking about potential amputations in the last days. And so here again, there's a whole trickle here. But unfortunately, we're hearing from people also whose family members and friends have suffered from this, and some of whom have died from this sort of condition where you start off healthy and there's just this quick downfall. One doctor telling me this is rare, but I don't see anything suspicious here because you don't give someone the flu if you're trying to intentionally kill them, a la like Vladimir Putin, etc. So while some of you are like, well, don't miss on my conspiracy theory for me, I just want to give you a reality check that yes, this is a crazy coincidence, since both are testifying against Boeing, but we should also note that both, before their death, had already been whistleblowers. They put out everything that they knew. So we've already heard their stories here. The idea that Boeing is intentionally going around killing people is pretty insane. At the same time, that's what everyone's suspicious was, but again, that's what a lot of people's reaction was when they saw that headline. So I just want to give you a reality check on the medical side of things here. Spirit Aerosystems actually used to be a part of Boeing. It was spun off. They make certain parts for Boeing and have for the past 20 years. And again, I heard from a reporter who's been talking to the family and lawyer of this guy, and they're very upset about these conspiracy theories that Boeing murdered their family member here. And so I just wanted to pass along what we know.
All right, from NBC News, former Nickelodeon producer Dan Schneider files a defamation lawsuit against Quiet on the Set producers. We've been telling you about this docuseries and did an interview on the Mo.news interview podcast with the journalist who broke the story. Now the former Nickelodeon producer Schneider, behind hits like The Amanda Show and Drake and Josh, sued the creators of Quiet on the Set, the dark side of kids' TV this week, for wrongly implying that he sexually abused the child actors that he worked with. The 4-part investigation discovery series featured interviews with several crew members and former child stars. Some of those actors alleged abuse, inappropriate behavior, and a toxic work environment while they were working on some of the hit Nickelodeon shows that Schneider produced. Drake Bell from Drake and Josh was one of those stars. He says that he suffered at the hands of his former acting and dialogue coach. Schneider did not appear in the docuseries, but written statements that he made aired throughout it. And after the series premiered, he was interviewed by an actor from iCarly. Schneider said watching the series, quote, was very difficult and made him face past behaviors, some of which are embarrassing and that he regrets, adding that he owes some people a pretty strong apology.
So it's important to note, if you've seen Quiet on Set or if you haven't, they didn't explicitly name Schneider as a sexual abuser, but his legal complaint says that certain voiceovers, certain graphics were edited to make it seem like he was, to make it look like he was terrible, and he believes defame him. At the same time, there were allegations. There were very specific allegations about him, that he threw tantrums, he asked employees for neck massages, that he texted child actors out of work, that he was controlling, that he was a misogynist. So a lot of stuff not so great about him, but he feels like he was painted with a brush to make it look like he was engaged in sexual abuse. And we should note there were two individuals who worked for him who says he knew nothing about, who ended up being convicted as child sex offenders. Schneider writing in a statement this week that while the docuseries truthfully showcased the mistakes I made, seeing the reactions to it has now left him with no choice but to take legal action and sue here for defamation. So this has been filed in LA Superior Court. He wants damages for reputational, financial, and emotional harm. Jill, if folks are looking to listen for more this weekend about Quiet on Set, Nickelodeon, some of the abuse suffered by child actors and some of those popular shows over the last 20 years, check out the Mo.news interview podcast, episode 79, my interview with Kate Taylor, the reporter who first broke the story and helped produce this docuseries, again, over on the Mo.news interview podcast. So search for that wherever you get your pods.
Bingo is taking the urban nightlife scene by storm. This story from Axios. Eatertainment, as they're calling it, has become the hottest new restaurant trend since the pandemic. Bingo-themed nightclubs, raves, and pop-up parties are showing up in cities across the country. Like one company, Bingo Loco, which stages bingo rave parties in cities like New York, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, and Austin. Part of their pitch: BAM, confetti, tunes, dance-offs, and lip-sync battles. Parties feature DJs playing retro tunes. And as for the bingo itself, apparently you can win vacations along with random prizes ranging from lawnmowers to giant teddy bears. Bingo as an immersive entertainment for young adults originated in the UK, and it is just starting to make inroads in America.
A lot of stuff starts in Britain, all those reality shows, etc., and then they make their way here to the U.S. Apparently, bingo as entertainment is, we can give them credit for it. So Bongo's Bingo, which is spread across the UK now to 40 countries, has been holding pop-up shows in New York City. There's a permanent bingo nightclub in London called Hijingo, and they're looking to bring that concept to the States. One of the organizers saying, this is a cheap night out for folks at Hijingo. You're not spending $200 for a top-end steakhouse. You're spending $50 or $60 to have, quote, a riot in a really immersive environment with an incredible and humorous, playful show. Jill, bingo. Maybe we got to do a Mo.news social night out at a bingo club.
Well, listen, you do the bingo cards for debate nights and State of the Union, so it's not so far off.
Maybe it's in our future, Jill. Maybe.
And finally, from the BBC, scientists believe that they have seen something novel in the animal kingdom. A Sumatran orangutan in Indonesia has self-medicated using a paste made from plants to heal a large wound on his cheek. They say it's the first time a creature in the wild has been recorded treating an injury with a medicinal plant after researchers saw Rackus, that's his name, applying the plant poultice or residue to his face. The wound closed up and healed in about a month. Scientists say the behavior could come from a common ancestor shared by humans and great apes. A biologist telling the BBC they are our closest relatives. And again, this points toward the similarities that we share with them. We are more similar than we are different. So what was this, like an aloe or something?
Yeah, apparently. So what's interesting here, Jill, is if you look back, Jane Goodall, the famous biologist, would see chimps back 60 years ago swallowing leaves that had medicinal properties. But they had never seen, until now, a wild animal actually applying a plant to a wound. That's behavior they've only seen in humans until now. This is not a plant that they eat. So apparently he would apply the liquid from the plant to his cheek for 7 minutes, then smear the chewed leaves onto his wound until it was fully covered, and then continue to feed on the plant. And so they saw the orangutan manipulating it. Apparently this plant has anti-inflammatory and antibacterial properties. It's used locally by humans to treat malaria and diabetes. And so, fascinating for the scientists here. Apparently this was back in June of 2022. They're talking about it now. They've documented all of it. I just looked up. Humans and orangutans share 97% DNA. They're not our closest relative. The chimps and humans share 99% of DNA. But the most important thing I learned, Jill, and I'll admit this, I double-checked how to pronounce orangutan because my whole life I've been calling them orangutans.
As have I, actually. Whoops.
So it wasn't just a Midwest thing because, you're from Long Island. I was going to blame it on Chicago, but that's not the case. So I'm curious, those of you who listen, you like to message me. Let us know on Instagram. Were you also thinking it was orangutan? Because it's orangutan, and it's been kind of hard to try to it's been hard so far on this podcast to maintain orangutan after 40 years of orangutan.
Although my husband heard us chatting about this and he peeked in and he was like, "Are you serious?"
Michael, the resident biologist of Long Island.
All right, it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend. Time for what we are watching, reading, and eating. Moshe, what are you watching?
So, Jill, have you gotten into Hacks on Max?
Yes, I love it.
So season 3 is officially out this weekend on Max. That's the drama comedy about the relationship between the stand-up comic Deborah Vance, played by Jean Smart, and her comedy writer. And so season 3 is out. And so we'll get started with that. And then for those of you who want to watch the most exciting 2 minutes in sports, the Kentucky Derby is set for tomorrow, usually Saturday evening, like around 7 p.m. You can double check the time on the Googles. Jill, what are you watching?
So new to Amazon Prime this weekend, The Idea of You. Anne Hathaway stars as Celine. She goes with her teenage daughter to Coachella and meets and discovers an instant rapport with a 24-year-old lead singer of a mega popular boy band. I'm in. I mean, this sounds... I love Anne Hathaway, and I think this is great. And it's the closest I'm going to get to Coachella.
Well, I was going to say, don't tell Michael about this. He's not going to let you take Alex to Coachella one day.
Okay, all right, Moshe, what are we reading this weekend?
Jill, Brittany Griner's memoir is out called Coming Home. She co-authored it with another author, looking back at her experience in Russian prison. So looking forward to getting into that. What are you reading?
All right, so I actually read this really interesting article in the Washington Post. It's called How a Connecticut Middle School Won the Battle Against Cell Phones. It's obviously something that we've been talking a lot about with Jonathan Haidt's new book. But basically, this assistant principal of a middle school in Connecticut about 2 years ago took the job and realized that the kids were just not all right. And he thought the problem was very clearly cell phones. So he did something about it. He banned them. And it took a while for the kids to adjust, but it seems like it has made a huge difference. Some saying that the kids are actually talking to each other at lunch and in the hallways.
Wow, how novel.
Exactly. And the reason that I actually love this article is because I found it hopeful that something is being done. It seems like this is kind of like a realistic solution.
We've hit a point, I feel like, with society and social media in this last year where the conversation has shifted.
It has shifted definitely in the UK, and it feels like it's starting to shift here.
And Jill, finally, what are you eating this weekend?
I had some ice cream from a good old-fashioned ice cream truck. And it was delicious.
Good humor. What do you get from the Good Humor truck?
You know what? So I actually got it was Mr. Softy. I got
a cone.
An actual, I got a cone.
Like the chocolate vanilla cone, like swirl.
Yes, my friend had an ice cream truck come for her daughter's birthday. And so everyone in the neighborhood
I love that.
Went, and it was wonderful. My friend Ramsey, actually, she's getting a lot of play on this podcast, even though she doesn't listen to it. She is the one who recommended the book I read last week.
She better start listening to it with this much play that Randy's getting. Hi, Randy. Jill, I always debate between like getting like a swirl cone and then like the hard chocolate that like, they dip it in and then put like peanuts on it or whatever. Or going with like a Choco Taco, or like a Chipwich. Like it's always a struggle for me when I go up to the window.
Well, you are the ice cream connoisseur here on this podcast, so I would say that wherever your head is, I'm all for it.
Jill, it's different every time. I don't think you're going to be able to follow it.
Okay, Moshe, what are you eating this weekend?
Jill, we just got a cheesecake babka from Bread's Bakery here in New York. You can check out their website, Bread's Bakery. I don't know if they're still shipping it, but if you're in the New York City area or plan to be here, apparently May is cheesecake month for them. So cheesecake babka, I'm into it. And I'm not typically a cheesecake person.
All right, everybody. That is a wrap on this week of podcasts. Thank you for listening to the Mo.news podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Please follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
It's been a week. Jill was in Florida. She came back to New York. We introduced the month of May. We learned more about It's Gonna Be May. It is May. Thank you for being with us on this journey this week. We'll be back next week. Appreciate all of you who've joined Mo News Premium with the promo going through Sunday for the 1 year special, mo.news/premium. You support us here at Mo News by joining, and we have an extra $10 off on the annual package, $60 for the entire year of Mo News Premium, extra podcasts, a members only feed, getting your questions answered. What's stopping you? mo.news/premium. Stay informed is the code. Stay informed.
All right, everyone, have a wonderful weekend.